Sunday. And to continue the conversation, I want to bring in Texas Democratic Congresswoman Julie Johnson, member of the Border Security and Enforcement Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. So a great guest to have on today. We really appreciate your time, Congresswoman. Thank you for being here. So let's start with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky while in Rome. Obviously, a very big meeting here. Trump expected to call Putin and Zelensky separately tomorrow, something else we're watching. And several European leaders are expected to speak with Trump before those calls. So as you see it, are you anticipating major breakthroughs this week? Is this what we're hoping for, right?
Well, we can only hope. I think the world would love to see a resolution and peace in Ukraine, except for maybe Putin. It's going to be interesting to see what Putin's part of it is. He did not appear at the last peace talks and did not show up. And so that's a huge problem for the credibility of the process. But, anytime we can have folks that are in a conflict sit down and meet and speak and try to get a resolution, I think we should all support that. So hopefully we can see a positive end. But at this point, talks so far have stalled and have not been productive. So I'm somewhat skeptical about it going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're watching, and hopefully you're right. Hopefully there'll be some good news this week. I also want to move on to a different deal in another region now. The Iranian president dismissing Trump's threats, but saying that they intend to keep negotiating with the U.S. on, what kind of different nuclear deal are we talking about here that Trump should be negotiating for, in your opinion?
Well, it's the whole thing about it is somewhat absurd to me because, we had a deal with Iran to not have them have nuclear weapons, and Trump blew that up and withdrew from the agreements. And so the part of the reason we're in this mess with Iran is because of Trump himself. But nonetheless, here we are back at the table. I think we have a strong national interest and world interest to have a denuclearized Iran. And so we need to just keep the pressure on that. We need to have that. We cannot have Iran have nuclear weapons. Full stop. I don't think Trump is a threatening president. That never gets things done. Most people don't respond to threats and bullies, but we need to have a very diplomatic finesse relationship and how we negotiate that.
And Congresswoman, I know that you're very passionate about many things. You were at a hearing this week where you questioned DHS Secretary Kristi Noem about migrant deportations. I would like our audience to take a listen to this and get your thoughts on the other side.
Has those efforts ceased in your agency? Are you going to cease trying to deport people without access to due process in the courts of law in compliance with the United States Supreme Court?
Well, Congresswoman, we are following due process and using it as to how Congress has laid out to us in statute, and we are complying with all federal judges' orders as well.
Well, you weren't complying at that time. It took the United States Supreme Court to order you to comply, so you hadn't proactively complied on your own.
Okay, and I also was looking at your posts on X. You said it's dangerous that the Secretary of Homeland Security doesn't understand due process. And I love this bit. And as a Texas lawyer, I'm happy to give her a crash course. You're offering some help there. So tell us more about what you were hoping to hear from her at this hearing.
Well, she was very disingenuous and not really there to commit to answer and have a thoughtful dialogue with the Congress, the legislative branch of our country. But at the end of the day, due process is a fundamental tenet of our foundational government. It's in the United States Constitution, written in the Fifth Amendment. And so it's something that separates us from dictatorships and rogue regimes throughout the world, is that the citizens of this country have access to our judicial system in moments of redress. And the Trump administration and the secretary just blatantly ignored it. They were like, they're going to round up people and ship them up on an airplane to a prison in a foreign country without ever the opportunity of a proper hearing, as our laws require. And it took the United States Supreme Court to step in and say, no, you're not doing that, and not here and not now. Fortunately, they followed the Supreme Court's opinion with respect to the Texas 171 folks that I was referring to in that hearing. But, for her to come in there and say, oh, we're always following all the laws, we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's is absolute wrong BS, and it's not true. And we just need to hold them accountable.
But just to be fair on the other side of this, I mean, she is talking about due process, and it's not just Noem, right? I mean, there are others in the administration who are working to follow the letter of the law. What about others in the administration that are doing what they can?
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that, it starts from the top. She is the Secretary of Homeland Security. So those that are following that work under her agency, it's her job to ensure that her agency is complying with the law, and they're not doing that. So the buck stops with her.
All right. Well, let's move on. I also want to ask you about this. Republicans are planning to investigate what they're calling Democrats' quote cover up of former President Biden's cognitive decline. And I'm sure you know, audio was released this week highlighting Biden's memory lapse, and several books now have been released on the state of his health. So is there merit to this investigation? We were talking about it earlier yesterday. I had a couple of guests on it as well. Some people say it's time to move on, but others are saying, wait a minute, we need to look back and talk about the Democrats who said, look, Biden is fine. And now we hear this audio. What do you make of it?
I think it's just a bunch of performative nonsense and looking in the review mirror. The reality of it is the Republicans have no plan for this country going forward that helps the American people. Our economy is still rising. They're seeking to cut health care. They're devastating Medicaid. They're hurting our farmers. Their tariffs are hurting our small businesses in this country. And they're just trying to deflect from these narratives. They've been getting hammered in the polls. Their polling has declined week by week by week by week. And they're trying to have a distracted talking point. The reality of it is it does not do one thing to help the American people by looking in the review mirror 4 years or however long ago. So, it's just a distraction that has absolutely no positive impact on the problems that we're solving today.
Also, The Hill is reporting that Democrats want Biden to take responsibility at this point for former Vice President Kamala Harris's defeat against Trump. So that is reporting coming from our friends over at The Hill. What do you think? Should Biden be held accountable on that?
I think this whole narrative is so stupid, and it really, it's like, what the hell? At the end of the day, Trump won the election. He did, and there's a lot of factors that you could point to that could have contributed to it, and I think Democrats should do postmortems just to be able to go forward. But this isn't some great Republican scandal that needs to be investigated. At the end of the day, Trump had a narrative that the American people voted for, and the Democrats didn't. That's the end of the story. It's time to move on, and we got to fix some problems going forward.
All right. Well, and let's talk about some of those problems, because tonight House Republicans will reportedly attempt to vote again on the big, beautiful bill. This comes as 5 GOP lawmakers voted with Democrats to block the bill earlier this week. So let's together take a listen to Congressman Zinke on the Hill Sunday, pushing to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse. We'll get you on the other side.
So I think we're going to have to go back and find more savings. And look, let's get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse first. Mm-hmm. And I think we can always debate what we should spend money on, but there should be no debate on fraud, waste, and abuse.
All right, so you're in the heart of the action. Do you think we could see this bill pass this week?
It's going to be really hard. The real problem with it is you have to take a step back. Our national debt is at crisis levels. I don't disagree with the concerns over our national debt. And the problem is this bill is not doing anything to fix that. And in fact, the Republicans' bill as is adds $4.5 trillion, the most significant increase to our national debt of any budget. And the reason they're doing that is for tax cuts for, less than 1% of the population in this country. And so they're not addressing one of the critical problems that we have. Instead, they're cutting very popular, very needy basic needs programs to harm American people so that they can, package it up in a tax cut. And, conservatives who are concerned about the debt aren't having it. And progressives who are concerned about the harm to the American people aren't having it. And so some changes need to be made.
All right. We've got a big week ahead. Democratic Congresswoman Julie Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. And don't forget to follow her on X for some of her thoughts. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.